Breaking news today. Top officials are meeting in private at the vice president's residence to discuss the Epstein files. Why are America's leaders so keen to control what you know? Stay with us for more updates.
Hello, and welcome to That News Show, where we discuss the latest facts, fakes, and hypocrisy as reported by the legacy media. Let's roll the tape.
MSNBC reports a new meeting at Vance's house concerning Jeffrey Epstein, sparking further questions. Let's consider why America's most influential figures are convening in secrecy to control what the public learns about Epstein. Such gatherings of politicians and prosecutors, whether Republican or Democrat, in secret settings, do not exemplify transparency, but rather suggest collusion. This scenario isn't about justice or protecting victims, it's about safeguarding themselves. These are the same individuals who have deceived the public for decades, engaged in foreign conflicts and obscure domestic scandals. Why do we continue to allow them to determine the truths we are privy to? Let's see what we've got here.
Their statement today says not only should the administration take the victims' feelings and experiences into account, but they need to bring the victims' voices effectively into the room where it happens. With respect to the Crime Victims' Rights Act, you and I have talked about this before. That is a law that requires the Department of Justice to notify known victims when certain court proceedings are taking place.
The administration must ensure that crime victims' actual voices, not just their feelings or experiences, are heard and respected in the decision-making process. Despite the Crime Victims' Rights Act, which obligates the Justice Department to inform victims about court proceedings, decisions too often are made behind closed doors without meaningful input from those most affected. The recent controversy surrounding the Epstein files and high-level meetings at the vice president's residence underscores this ongoing issue. Decisions about disclosure and accountability are made by elites, excluding survivors and their families. This is not merely a procedural oversight. It's a blatant disregard for the law and the dignity of those who have suffered. Victims deserve a seat at the table, not just a mention in a press release. This pattern of sidelining victims is not new. The previous administration also failed to notify and consult with victims in high-profile cases, perpetuating a culture of secrecy that favored the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable. This legacy of neglect and opacity continues to affect us today, prompting victims' advocates to demand genuine participation and respect. With the current administration, there has been some progress towards accountability, including congressional subpoenas and a push for greater transparency. The fact that it requires significant public pressure and bipartisan outrage to even consider releasing documents or transcripts shows the extent of institutional decay. Too often, officials from both parties are more concerned with protecting their own interests than with delivering justice for victims. The Crime Victims' Rights Act was designed to ensure the victims are informed, consulted, and respected. Yet, we repeatedly see the same scenario. Elites negotiate in secret, victims remain uninformed, and public trust in the system erodes. If we are truly committed to restoring trust, it starts by prioritizing victims' voices in every decision, not as an afterthought, but as a fundamental principle. Anything less perpetuates the unacceptable double standards that the American public is rightfully weary of.
So that lawyer that you were referring to, Brad Edwards, said in a letter to the court, we need to change this process before you even decide whether or not to release these transcripts. Force them to notify everyone who is affected here. Give those folks time to have their voices heard by you. And to the extent that you're going to release the information, allow victims' lawyers into that process so that they can review the redactions proposed by the government, because there isn't trust there that the government knows how to sufficiently protect the information, identifying details, names of the victims here.
Brad Edwards' advocacy for stricter notification and involvement of victims' counsel before releasing transcripts is a crucial correction to a system long dominated by bureaucrats and political insiders. The ongoing debate about the government's ability to protect the identities of those harmed underscores the lost credibility of federal agencies, particularly after years of obstruction and secretive deals by the previous administration, which often put elite reputations above the rights of ordinary Americans. The issue extends beyond mere transparency. It's about restoring accountability to a justice system influenced by globalist interests and political operatives across the spectrum. The blending of law enforcement with political strategy during meetings at the vice president's residence raises legitimate concerns about whether the objective is to serve justice or manage public relations and protect the influential. Congressional Republicans have notably increased oversight, a stark contrast to the previous lack of action when Democrats led the executive branch. The issuance of broad bipartisan subpoenas is a positive step. This newfound vigor largely stems from grassroots outrage and persistent advocacy by victims, which has brought these issues to the forefront. Without such pressure, important files would likely remain hidden and survivors marginalized. Edwards' proposal for a neutral third party to review redactions is not merely a procedural formality, it's a critical safeguard against the institutional arrogance that led to the secretive 2008 non-prosecution agreement with Epstein, where deals were made behind closed doors excluding victims. This legacy of secrecy, a bipartisan issue, was notably perpetuated by a Democrat-led Justice Department that often disregarded the voices of the vulnerable to protect the well-connected. The administration now faces a challenging balancing act between protecting ongoing investigations and the privacy of survivors, and acknowledging that continued secrecy primarily serves those with something to hide. The significant public and congressional pressure required to even consider releasing these transcripts highlights the deep-seated culture of elite impunity. As another election cycle approaches, this issue remains relevant. Voters are keen to see which party will genuinely commit to ending the cycle of cover-ups and double standards. The current administration, led by Republicans, has shown some readiness to challenge these entrenched interests. The true test lies in whether they will implement real reforms or let bureaucratic inertia prevail. Americans deserve a system where victims' rights are prioritized and the truth is not sacrificed for political convenience.
Victims, how much weight do you think a judge generally does give to victims' needs, requests, versus other considerations in making a ruling like this?
I think it depends on the judge, but to answer your question, they should give a lot of weight. Right?
Judges are tasked with balancing victims' needs and requests against various other factors. The emphasis on victims' perspectives often varies significantly by judge and circumstance. 2, frequently the so-called balancing act favors institutional convenience or elite interests over true justice for the victims. MSNBC's coverage of this issue presents several glaring problems. Their fact-checking is sporadic, often highlighting statements from advocacy groups and government officials without thorough scrutiny of the legal basis or the judicial consultation with victims. The network's coverage tends to emphasize criticism of the current administration, while neglecting the bipartisan and historical neglect of victims' rights, creating a skewed perception of accountability. The network's reliance on expert opinions also requires scrutiny. Legal analysts on MSNBC typically reinforce the network's editorial stance, offering little in the way of diverse legal viewpoints. For example, the debate over the enforcement of the Crime Victims' Rights Act is more complex than reported, especially considering recent federal rulings that have significant implications for survivors and local communities. Unfortunately, these complexities are often overlooked in favor of simpler, narrative-driven sound bites. Visually, MSNBC storytelling often relies on dramatic graphics and emotional testimonies. While powerful, this approach can detract from in-depth analysis. For instance, coverage of the strategic meeting at Vice President Vance's residence used evocative visuals and music to suggest secrecy and scandal, yet failed to dig into the legal and historical context of such meetings. There are specific strengths in MSNBC's reporting. The network has provided a platform for victims' advocates and detailed coverage of congressional subpoena actions, including rare bipartisan support for increased oversight. Yet the reporting often falls short of exploring the necessity of these reforms or the failures of past Democratic leadership to address similar issues. What's notably lacking is a willingness to challenge the entrenched interests that perpetuate these issues. Rather than focusing solely on the current administration's errors, MSNBC could better serve the public by investigating broader, systemic failures, many of which stem from globalist policies and a bipartisan culture of secrecy. The American people deserve media that digs deeper, holds all accountable, and prioritizes the rights of victims over political convenience. This isn't just about transparency, it's about restoring integrity to a system that too often favors the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable.
They're asking for respect. These letters show grief, they show betrayal, they show fear, all wrapped in a demand for basic human dignity. They're not saying don't release the files, they're saying don't release us. With them, they're just asking for that private dignity. They're asking for, as Lisa pointed out, some type of notification to all of the victims, but also maybe a third-party arbitrator, a neutral person who can go through the files and then maybe potentially re-notify individuals who weren't notified initially or were notified without full notification under the CVRA. So they're just demanding transparency, but not really at the cost of their safety or sanity or re-victimization. And I think that's really important to note.
These letters from the victims starkly remind us what's at stake. Not merely transparency for its own sake, but preserving the basic human dignity of those who have suffered enough. The call here is not to protect the powerful or keep the public uninformed. It's a plea for a process that prevents re-traumatization of survivors through careless bureaucratic disclosures. The request for a neutral third-party arbitrator and proper notification isn't an obstacle to justice. It's the minimum a system that respects the rights of its most vulnerable should ensure. For decades, both political parties have professed to support victim rights, yet actual implementation remains flawed, riddled with loopholes and plagued by underfunding. Studies expose that even with laws in place, victims often encounter barriers due to resource constraints and lack of enforcement. In states with stronger protections, outcomes improve, yet officials still cite funding and bureaucratic inertia as major hurdles. This issue goes beyond legality. It's about priorities and political will. When government agencies treat these rights as optional, the justice system prioritizes insiders, leaving ordinary Americans last. From a financial standpoint, the costs of failing to protect victim dignity are tangible. Eroding trust in the justice system diminishes public confidence, impacting everything from jury participation to law enforcement cooperation. This has real economic repercussions, increasing public safety budgets and raising costs for local communities. Households face higher taxes and insurance premiums, while small businesses suffer when community stability is rocked by justice failures. Contrastingly, the current administration, though not flawless, has responded to public outcry by enhancing congressional oversight and advocating for greater transparency. The bipartisan support for subpoenas and document production marks progress, yet it shouldn't require such extensive public pressure to initiate action. The previous Democratic administration had ample opportunity to address these issues, but fell short, leaving survivors to contend with a biased system. There's a broader pattern that's hard to ignore. When elites convene privately to decide the fate of sensitive files, it only reinforces public suspicions about power dynamics in Washington. The Epstein case exemplifies how the system protects the elite while ordinary citizens bear the consequences. The long-term economic impact of this institutional distrust is significant. If Americans continue to perceive justice as purchasable or influenced by political connections, local investments will decline, and the social fabric will fray. Therefore, reforms must extend beyond procedural adjustments to tackle the root causes of elite impunity and bureaucratic inertia. Victims aren't seeking special treatment. They're demanding the same respect and consideration anyone would want for their family. Their call for a fair process, balancing transparency with dignity, isn't just morally correct. It's crucial for restoring faith in our institutions and ensuring that justice is a reality for all Americans. And there you have it. We see a recurring pattern. Powerful elites convene in secret, make decisions behind closed doors, and expect us to trust their judgment blindly. When their allies are involved, it seems the rules always bend. Under the last Democratic administration led by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, this practice seemed to reach its peak, with the public receiving nothing but empty promises and blocked investigations. Now, with President Trump in office, there's a shift towards prioritizing American interests over global ones and the agendas of elusive insiders. The pressing question remains: how long will we tolerate a system where the truth is merely what the ruling class dictates? True justice begins with demanding answers, no matter how uncomfortable for those in power. Leave a comment below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. That's all for now.